The morning gleamed over the lake of Gennesaret. The water scintillated in the early light, muddy at the banks from the soil which the rains had washed down during the night, farther on blue-green, and farther still milky white. The sails of the fishing boats were stretched out to dry. Some boats were already in open waters. The fishing had begun. Rosy white ring plovers perched happily on the quivering water. Black cormorants stood on the rocks, their round eyes pinned on the lake in case any fish should surface to rollick gleefully in the foam. Next to the shore, a Capernaum, drenched to the bone, was awakening. Cocks shook the water from their feathers, donkeys brayed, calves moved tenderly, and mixed with these ill-matched sounds the meaningful talk of human beings added security and gladness to the air. 10 or so fishermen in an isolated cove, their large feet braced in the pebbles, were singing softly while they slowly, dexterously pulled in the nets. Over them stood old Zebedee, their loquacious and 7 times cunning boss. He pretended that he loved every one of them like a son and pitied them, but he did not give them a moment's rest. They were paid by the day, and voracious old Gobblejaws made sure they did not relax for even a second. Bells chattered. A herd of goats and sheep bounded towards the shore. Dogs barked. Someone whistled. The fisherman turned to look, but old Zebedee rushed forward. "It's Philip and his Philippikins," he said with irritation. "As for us, back to work." He grabbed the rope himself and pretended to help. Fishermen continually appeared from the village loaded down with nets and followed by their wives, who carried the day's provisions balanced on their heads. Sunburned boys lost no time in grasping the oars and rowing. They stopped every 2 or 3 strokes to bite the dry crust they held in their hands. Philip stepped onto a rock where he could see them and whistled. He wanted to chat, but old Zebedee frowned. Cupping his hands to his mouth, he shouted, "Leave us alone, Philip. We've got work to do. Go somewhere else." And he turned him a cold shoulder. "Let him go gab with Jonah. He's over there throwing his nets," he grumbled. "As for us lads, we've got work to do." Once more he seized a knot in the rope and began to pull. The fishermen resumed their sad, unvarying work chant, and all had their eyes glued on the buoys of red gourds which came continually closer. But just as they were about to haul the womb of the net with its load of fish up to the beach, they heard a dreary buzzing in the distance, all over the plain, accompanied by shrill cries like those of the dirge. Old Zebedee tensed his huge, hairy ear in order to hear distinctly, and his men seized the opportunity and stopped work. "What's happened, lads?" Zebedee asked. "That's the dirge the women are lamenting. Some great man died." An aged fisherman answered him. "May God grant you a long life, boss." But old Zebedee had already climbed up onto the rock. His rapacious eyes swept over the plain, where he could see men and women running to the fields, falling, getting up again, and raising the dirge. The whole village began to turn upside down. Women passed by, pulling out their hair, but behind them the men walked in silence, bowed down to the earth. "What's happened?" Zebedee yelled to them. "Where are you going? Why are the women crying?" But they hurried past him towards the threshing floors and did not answer. "Hey, where are you going? Who died?" howled Zebedee, waving his hands. "Who died?" A stocky man halted, puffing. "The wheat," he replied. "Speak sensibly. I'm Zebedee. People don't joke with me. Who died?" He was answered by cries which came from every direction. "The wheat, the barley, the bread. Old Zebedee remained standing with gaping mouth, but suddenly he slapped his behind. He understood. "It's the flood," he murmured. "It washed the harvest off the threshing floors. Well, let the poor complain. It's no concern of mine." The cries now inundated the plain. Every soul in the village had come outdoors. The women fell on the threshing floors and rolled in the mud, hurrying to gather up the small amount of wheat and barley which had been left as sediment in the hollows and furrows. The arms of Zebedee's men fell useless to their sides. They had no strength to pull in the nets. Seeing them all gazing towards the plain with unemployed hands, Zebedee drew into a rage. "To work!" he shouted, coming down from the rock. "Heave!" Once more he grasped the rope and pretended to pull. "We're fishermen, glory be to God, not farmers. Let the floods come. The fish are expert swimmers and don't drown. 2 and 2 make 4." Philip abandoned his flock and jumped from stone to stone. He wanted to talk. "A new deluge, lads," he shouted, appearing before them. "Stop, for God's sake, and let's talk. It's the end of the world. Just count up the calamities. Day before yesterday they crucified our great hope, the zealot. Yesterday God opened the floodgates of heaven just exactly when the threshing floors were loaded, and away went our bread. And not very long ago one of my sheep had a 2-headed lamb. It's the end of the world, I tell you. For the love of God, stop working and let's talk." But old Zebedee caught fire. "Won't you get the hell out of here, Philip, and leave us alone?" he yelled, the blood rising from his head. "Can't you see we've got work to do? We're fishermen, and you're a shepherd, so let the farmers complain. What do we care? Mend your work." "And have you no pity, Zebedee, for the farmers who'll die of hunger?" objected the shepherd. "They're Israelites too, you know. Our brothers. We're all one tree, all of us, and it's obvious that the plowmen are the roots. If they dry out, so do we all. And one thing more, Zebedee, if the Messiah comes and we've all died, in the meantime, whom will he find to save? Answer me that, if you can." Old Zebedee huffed and puffed. If you'd pinched his nostrils, he surely would have exploded. "Go on, for the love of God. Go back to your Philippkins. I'm sick and tired of hearing about messiahs. One comes along, he's crucified. Along comes the next, he's crucified too. And haven't you learned what message Andrew brought his father, Jonah? It seems that wherever you go and wherever you stop, you find a cross. The dungeons are overflowing with messiahs. Ooh, enough's enough. We've been getting along just fine without messiahs. They're nothing but a nuisance. Go on, bring me some cheese, and I'll give you a pan full of fish. You give me, and I give you. That's the Messiah." He laughed and turned to his adopted sons. "Step lively, my brave lads, so that we can light the fire, put on the chowder, and eat. Look, the sun's risen a yard, and we haven't done a thing." But no sooner had Philip lifted his foot to go join his flock than he halted. A donkey, nearly perishing with a load which reached to its ears, appeared on the narrow path which hugged the shore of the lake, and behind the donkey was a colossus with bare feet, open shirt, and a red beard. He held a forked stick in his hand and prodded the beast. He was in a hurry. "Look, I think it's old Devil Hair himself, Judas Iscariot," said the shepherd, holding his ground. He started his rounds to the villages again to shoe mules and make pickaxes. "Come on, let's see what he's got to say." "A plague on him," muttered old Zebedee. "I don't like his hair. I've heard that his ancestor Cain had a beard like that. The unfortunate fellow was born in the desert of Idumea," said Philip. "Lions still roam there, so better not pick an argument with him." He put 2 fingers into his mouth and began to whistle to the donkey driver. "Hello, Judas," he called. "Glad to see you. Come over this way a bit so we can get a better look at you." The redbird spat and cursed. He did not like this shepherd fellow, nor did he like Zebedee, that parasite. Didn't like them at all. But he was a blacksmith, a man of need, and he approached. "What news do you bring us from the villages along the route?" Philip asked. "What's happening on the plain?" The Redbeard stopped his donkey by pulling its tail. "Everything's just fine," he answered with a dry laugh. "The Lord is exceedingly merciful, bless him. Yes, he loves his people. In Nazareth he crucifies the prophets, and here on the plain he sends a deluge and takes away his people's bread. Can't you hear the lamentations? The women are wailing for the wheat. You'd think it was their own sons." "Whatever God does is right," Zebedee objected, vexed because all this talk was crippling the day's work. "I have confidence in him no matter what he does. When everyone drowns and I'm the only one to escape, God is protecting me. When everyone else is saved and I'm the only one to drown, God is protecting me then too. I have confidence, I tell you. 2 and 2 make 4. When the Redbeard heard these words, he forgot that he was a day laborer who lived from hand to mouth, and had to rely on every one of these people for his livelihood. Fired up by his evil disposition, he spoke, and did not mince his words. "You have confidence, Zebedee, only because the Almighty lays a nice soft bed for you and your affairs. Your worship has 5 fishing boats in his service, and have 50 fishermen as slaves. You feed them just exactly enough so they'll have enough strength to work for you, and won't die of starvation. And all the while your Highness stuffs his coffers and his larders and his belly. Then you raise your hands to heaven and say, 'God is just. I have confidence in him. The world is beautiful. I hope it never changes.' Why don't you ask the zealot who was crucified the other day why he struggled to free us, or the peasants whose whole year's supply of wheat God snatched away in one night? Ask them. They're rolling in the mud right now, picking it up grain by grain and weeping. Or ask me. I go around the villages and see and hear Israel suffering. How long? How long? Didn't you ever ask yourself that, Zebedee?" "To tell you the truth," answered the old man, "I have no confidence in red hairs. You're from the stock of Cain, who murdered his brother. Go to the devil, my friend. I don't want to talk with the likes of you." This said, he turned his back on him. The red beard gave the donkey a swat with the forked stick. The beast drew up its head, slid back into the yoke, bolted forward, and began to run. "Never fear, old parasite," Judas murmured. "The Messiah will come to put everything in order." When he had got around to the rocks, he turned. "We'll have a chance to discuss all this again, Zebedee," he shouted. "The Messiah will come one day, won't he? He will, and then personally he'll put every rascal in his place. You're not the only one who has confidence. See you again on the day of judgment." "Go to hell, red hair," was Zebedee's reply. The womb of the net had finally become visible, and it was filled with gilt heads and red mullets. Philip stood between the two of them, unable to take sides. What Judas, no, what Judas had said was true and courageous. The shepherd had often felt like smearing such words in the old man's ugly face or beating them over his head. But he had never had the courage. His unregenerate was a potent landlord. Strong on land and sea, he owned every one of the meadows in which Philip grazed his goats and sheep. So how could the shepherd attack him? One had to be either a madman or a hero, and Philip was neither. He simply talked big and much, and he never took an unnecessary chance. He had remained silent, therefore, while the other two quarreled, and was still standing by, bashful and irresolute. The fishermen had now pulled in the nets. He bent down with them and helped fill the hampers. Even Zebedee was plunged waist deep in the water, where he directed men and fish. But while they all admired the overflowing hampers, completely elated, the Redbeard's hoarse voice suddenly echoed from the rock opposite. "Hey, Zebedee!" Old Zebedee played deaf. Once more the voice thundered, "Hey, Zebedee, take my advice and go collect your son Jacob." "Jacob?" the old man cried out in a ferment. As far as his younger son was concerned, the damage was done. He had lost him. He did not want to lose this one too. He had no other son, and he needed him in his work. "Jacob?" he called to Judas in a worried voice. "What do you have to say about Jacob, you confounded red hair?" "I saw him on the road getting friendly with the cross-maker. They were having a pleasant chat." "What cross-maker, infidel? Speak clearly." "The son of the carpenter, the one who builds crosses in Nazareth and crucifies the prophets." "Too late. Poor old Zebedee. Jacob's lost too. You had two sons. God snatched the one and the devil the other." Old Zebedee stood with gaping mouth. A flying fish bounded out of the water, winged over his head, then dived back into the lake and disappeared. "A bad sign, a bad sign," murmured the old man in a panic. "Is my son going to leave me like this, like the flying fish, and disappear beneath the deep waters?" He turned to Philip. "Did you see the flying fish? Nothing that happens in the world is without its meaning. Tell me, what was the meaning of the fish, you shepherds? If it had been a lamb, I'd be able to tell you, Father Zebedee, even if I had seen only its back, but fish are not in my department." He was angry because, unlike Judas, he lacked the courage to speak out like a man. "I'm off to see to my animals," he said, putting his crook over his shoulders. He jumped from rock to rock and caught up with Judas. "Wait, brother," he called to him. "I want to talk to you." "Go to your sheep, coward," the Redbeard answered him without turning. "Go to your sheep. Keep your nose out of men's affairs, and don't call me brother. I'm no brother of yours." "Wait, I tell you. I have something to say to you. Don't get angry." Judas halted now and eyed him with disdain. "Why didn't you open your mouth? Why are you afraid of him? Can you still be afraid when you know what's happening, who is coming, where we are headed? Or maybe you haven't got wind of it yet. Well, poor devil, the time is near. The King of the Jews is approaching in all his glory, and woe be to the cowards." "More, Judas, more," Philip implored. "Haul me over the coals. Lift the forked stick you're holding and beat some self-respect into me. I'm fed up with always being afraid." Judas approaching him slowly and grasped his hand. "Does this come from the heart, Philip, or are you just speaking hollow words?" "I'm fed up, I tell you. I was disgusted with myself today. Go in front, Judas. Go in front and show me the way. I'm ready." The Redbird looked around him and lowered his voice. "Philip, can you kill?" "Men? Naturally. What did you think? Sheep? I haven't killed a man yet, but I'd be able to, yes, without a doubt. Last month I felled and killed a bull all by myself. A man's easier. Come with us." Philip shuddered. He understood. "Are you one of them? One of the zealots?" he asked, his face bathed in terror. He had heard a great deal about this awful brotherhood, the Saint Assassins, as it was called. They terrorized everyone from Mount Hermon down to the Dead Sea, and even further south as far as the desert of Idumea. Armed with crowbars, ropes, and knives, they went about proclaiming, "Don't pay tribute to the infidels. We have only one Lord, Adonai. Kill every Jew who disobeys the sacred law, who laughs, speaks, or works with the enemies of our God, the Romans. Strike, kill, clear the roads so that the Messiah may pass. Cleanse the world, make ready the streets. He is coming." They entered the villages and cities in broad daylight to assassinate without consulting anyone but themselves, a traitorous Sadducee or a bloodthirsty Roman. The landowners, priest and high priest trembled before them and called down the anathema. They were the ones who incited insurrections and brought out the Roman troops, with the result that massacres broke forth at regular intervals, and rivers of Jewish blood were spilled. "Are you one of them? One of the zealots?" Philip repeated in a hushed voice. "Afraid, my brave friend? asked the Redbeard, laughing with scorn. Don't be alarmed. We're not murderers. We're fighting for freedom. Philip, to emancipate our God, to emancipate our souls, arise. The moment has come when you too can show the world that you're a man. Join us. But Philip stared at the ground. He already regretted having been so effusive with Judas about such matters. Brave words are fine, he reflected. It's delightful to sit with a friend, to eat, drink, start weighty discussions, say, I shall do and I shall show. But on your guard, Philip, don't go any further or you'll find yourself in hot water. Judas leaned over him and spoke to him in a changed voice. His heavy paw now touched Philip's shoulder gently and caressed it. What is the life of a man? What is it worth? Nothing if it isn't free. We're fighting for freedom, I tell you. Join us. Philip was silent. If he could only get away, but Judas kept a firm hold on his shoulder. Join us. You're a man. Decide. Do you have a knife? Yes. Keep it on you at all times under your shirt. You may need it at any minute. We're passing through difficult days, my brother. Don't you hear buoyant steps coming closer and closer? It's the Messiah, and he must not find the road closed. The knife is more of a help in this than bread. Here, look at me. He opened his shirt. Naked and gleaming next to the dark skin of his breast was a short, double-edged Bedouin's dagger. If it hadn't been for Zebedee's scatterbrained son Jacob, I would have sunk it today into a traitor's heart. Yesterday, before I left Nazareth, the Brotherhood condemned him to death. Who? And the lot of killing him fell to me. Who? Philip asked again. He had grown afraid. That's my business, the Redbird replied abruptly. Keep your nose out of our affairs. Don't you trust me? Judas swept his eyes about him, then leaned over and seized Philip by the arm. Listen well to what I'm going to say to you, Philip, and don't breathe a word of it to anyone, or you're done for. I'm on my way now to the desert, to the monastery. The monks called me to make some tools for them. In a few days, 3 or 4, I'll be passing your camp again. Turn over well in your mind the words we exchanged. Keep mum. Don't let out the secret to anyone. Decide all by yourself if you're a man and you come to the right decision. I'll reveal to you who we plan to strike. Who? Do I know him? Don't be in such a hurry. You're not one of the brothers yet. He held out his immense hand. Farewell, Philip. You were a mere nothing until now. No one cared whether you were dead or alive. I was the same, a nothing, until the day I entered the Brotherhood. Just ever since then, I've been a different person. I became a man. No more Judas the Redbeard, the blacksmith, who slaved like an ox with the sole purpose of nourishing these feet and his belly and this ugly snout. Now I'm working for a great purpose, do you hear? For a great purpose, and whoever works for a great purpose, even if he's the humblest of the lot, he becomes a great. Understand? That's all I'm going to say to you. Farewell. He poked his donkey and set off at a trot for the desert. Philip remained all alone. Resting his chin on his crook, he watched Judas until he reached the other side of the rocks and disappeared. Look here, this Redbird speaks well, he thought, well, and like a saint. A bit boastful, perhaps, but who cares? As long as a fellow sticks to words, everything sails along just fine. But if he goes over to action, watch out. Philip, poor devil, think of your little sheep. This business will take some reflection, Best let it ride, and wait to see what happens. He placed his crook over his shoulders. He had heard the bells of his goats and sheep, and hurried off whistling. Zebedee's adopted sons had made a fire meanwhile, and put on water for the fish soup. As soon as the water boiled, they threw in rockfish, limpets, sea urchins, and dentecs or two, and a green-haired stone to make the food smell of the sea. In a little while they would add the giltheads and red mullets, for how could they be satisfied with just rockfish and limpets? The hungry fishermen squatted in a circle around the pot and waited anxiously, talking in low voices among themselves. The oldest leaned over to his neighbor. It was wonderful to see the blacksmith rub it in his face. Patience, the day will come when the poor will rise to the top and the rich sink to the bottom. That's the meaning of justice. Do you think that will ever happen? Replied the other, who had been consumed by hunger ever since his youth. Do you think that will ever happen on this earth? There's a God, isn't there? The old man answered. Yes, there is, and he's just, isn't he? He's got to be if he's God, hasn't he? He's just. So you see, it will happen. All we need, son, is patience. Patience. Hey, what are you mumbling about over there? Said Zebedee, who had caught some of it and grown suspicious. You just worry about your work and forget about God. He knows better than you what he's about. Good Lord, what's next? They all immediately fell silent. The old fisherman got up, took the wooden spoon, and stirred the soup.